Hello, Leafs fans, and welcome to the Babbling Buds Podcast, hosted by Jordan Jacklin.
Welcome to the 5th episode of the Babbling Buds Podcast, hosted by yours truly, Jordan Jacklin. A twice-a-week show covering the Toronto Maple Leafs and the NHL as a whole, bringing in a mix of various analytics and the eye tests when discussing players and the team. I thank you for joining me today, and to make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes, follow us on Twitter at The Babbling Buds to stay up to date on all news surrounding the show. And it's a pleasure to announce today's guest, Steven Ellis, a web editor and contributor for the Hockey News, and make sure to follow his Twitter at Steven Ellis THN. And my first question to you is, what was the biggest highlight covering the World Championships this year that took place in Latvia so far?
Well, it's been a really good event, and at the time of recording this, we're still waiting to find out the gold medal game. But this has been I predicted before the tournament that this was going to be unpredictable, and I think we got that. Where we saw Latvia beat Canada for the first time ever. We saw Denmark beat Sweden. We saw Belarus beat Sweden. Sweden didn't even make the quarterfinals. Kazakhstan was in it ahead of Canada heading into the final days. It's like there were so many great moments in this tournament. So I think the thing, kind of like what we saw in the 2018 Olympics, is when you take the NHLers out of the equation, the field of talent, it's a much closer group, and that makes it a lot of fun. And obviously Canada did have 17 Canadians in this tournament. Americans brought a big contingent of that too. But the fact that it wasn't the best, I think really kind of evened it out. And when you look at some of those teams that were out there winning games early, like Latvia, like Germany, who got the 4th place in the tournament, like Kazakhstan, those teams were doing so with very few NHL players to none. Like Canada played its first 3 games, and they lost to they lost to Kazakhstan, or they lost to Germany, and they lost to Latvia, and they lost to the Americans. Between those 3 countries, they still had fewer NHL players than Team Canada, and yet Canada lost all 3 of those games. So the fact that it was that unpredictable makes it so much fun, and it's been a really good tournament. I wouldn't say that the greatest hockey we've seen, and maybe the greatest overall tournament, but it's been just like every day you just don't know what to expect, and I think that makes that fun.
Well, I can't wait to dive into that more just a bit later in the show, but we got to get off with some Leafs events since the last show. And we got to kick it off. Pontus Holmberg signing a 2-year ELC for the Leafs and will return to Vaxjo next season. He was the playoff MVP for them in their championship run in the Swedish Hockey League, scoring 14 points in 17 games. It's crazy because he was drafted as an overager playing in Sweden's 3rd division back in 2018. And he has come so far in 3 years. I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts on Pontus Holmberg and if he could potentially show some NHL potential like Andreas Janssen has and like Pierre Engvall has for this organization?
I'm not too high on him. A lot of what I've been able to see of him has been in international play, and I've never actually seen him record a point at pretty much any level. So there's that. Obviously, his playoffs was really good. His regular season was just okay. So this would be a big year for him to kind of see where he takes his game. He wasn't an overager when he was drafted. He's definitely a skilled player that can kind of, I feel like because his size, he sometimes gets lost in the lineup. He's not a big guy. He's also not the greatest shooter. I'm not too high on him, but he's a depth guy that you can keep around, and maybe he comes and surprises you from the 4th line in the future. But just from what I've seen, I've not really been a huge fan of his game. He played a few games of the World Championship and didn't produce anything. So I'm not totally convinced he's going to be much, but it's clearly the Leafs liked him enough to sign him at this point in his development.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I do trust the Leafs scouting department that oversees the European prospects. I'm going to specifically highlight Tommy Bergman. You know, looking at the success of the 7th round picks, like I mentioned before, in Janssen and Engvall, these guys are playing in the NHL. And I actually this is a fun fact for you. Spanning from the 2013 to 2018 drafts, only 28 out of the 187 players picked in the 6th round have played at least one game in the NHL. Most notable are Kevin Labanc, and John Marino. So it is possible to find talent there, but you only got a 15% chance of even getting one game out of the player you're picking. So I found that quite interesting. And we have some updates on some rumors circulating on Zach Hyman. His agent, Todd Reynolds, refuted the report that he was offered a contract of a $5 million average annual value, saying it's not accurate. Steven, I'm just curious, Zach Hyman has really elevated his play every season. He's now becoming a 30 goal, 60 point type of pace player. what contract would you be comfortable giving Hyman if you were the Leafs and say they just can't offer him what he wants? Well, where do you see him ending up?
That's kind of the problem there. It's clearly he brings a lot of value to this team. He's a guy that like every team could use a guy like Zach Hyman. He complements those top guys well. But I do question how good he is when he's not playing with a guy like Austin Matthews, when he's not playing with the top line. Obviously, he's one of the hardest working players on the team, and kind of like you almost need him to take the hometown discount to stick around, because it's like, okay, we even though we lost to the Montreal Canadiens, even though we lost again in the first round, we continue to show signs that there's something here. 1 year, it's going to click, kind of like Washington, kind of like St. Louis. In this case, you want Hyman. You don't want him to go for too much. 5.5 million would be a good value, but it truly depends kind of where Toronto views their prospects, where they view a guy like Nick Robertson, where they view those other guys that they're going to be coming up in the system, like a Rodion Amirov, and say, like, how long are you guys going to take? Are we going to commit a lot of money to Hyman to be here for a while, and then we don't need you necessarily in a couple years because we've got someone else to kind of fill your spot? So it's a tough situation, but I think the Leafs definitely will want to keep him. It would be a disappointment for the team if he leaves, but at the same time, you do got a cap to worry about. Obviously, cap's not going up for a few years, and if that money is better spent other places, then maybe that's what you got to do.
And I would say, his play style is somewhat similar, but not directly comparable to the likes of Milan Lucic back in his prime. Maybe you could say David Clarkson as well. And look how poorly those contracts ended up aging. You kind of have to be careful giving a long-term contract to a player that's definitely has roughed up his body so far in his career. Not that I love Zach Hyman. I mean, if I had to see Zach Hyman go to a jersey that wasn't Toronto's, I think I'd be pretty devastated. But that's kind of just a part of the business. And you have to be careful here, especially when you're giving $40 million of your cap to your top players. You have to make sure you're surrounding them with cheap, quality, young talent. And with that, our last piece of Leafs news, Austin Matthews was nominated for the Lady Byng Memorial Trophy alongside Jacob Slavin and Jared Spurgeon. This is the second consecutive year that he's been nominated for this award. And I just got to say, Slavin is likely winning this award just because he accumulated only 2 penalty minutes this whole season, playing the tough assignments that he does. Would you agree on that take, Steven?
100%. Matt Larkin from the Hockey News, he's kind of really been beating that drum of like, give Slavin this award for a few years now. And I think this year, you just pretty much got to do it. It's, forwards don't necessarily need to be physical. They don't need to shut down guys. Austin Matthews, if he doesn't throw a hit, it's not a big deal. He does throw hits, but he doesn't need to, because what he gets paid for is scoring. But Slavin's got to be like really clean when he's playing against some of the top players in the world coming down on the wing or down the middle, and he's got to make sure he doesn't do any infractions on them. I think you kind of got to give it to him. He seemed like the right pick in the past. This year, like, I think he is the right guy. I think going anywhere else would kind of be an odd decision there.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. It's definitely his award to lose at this point. And with that, we can jump into our general NHL news. The New York Islanders tying up their series against the Boston Bruins, winning 4-1 in Game 4. Here's some highlights from this game. It included Taylor Hall fighting Scott Mayfield in the first period. His first fight since 2011. Saw a fun fact there that Charlie McAvoy was only 13 years old when Hall got in his last fight a decade ago. Steven, what about Hall has changed since we last talked about him on my Sabres podcast back in March? Because he completely rejuvenated his career so far as a Bruin, eh?
Well, since then, he's playing on a good team, so that helps. This is a guy that, like, he played on a bunch of really bad teams in a row, and you could tell almost like his motivation wasn't there. He wasn't putting in the effort that we saw when he won the MVP award. Then all of a sudden, he goes to a team where it's a winning culture, there's a shot at the championship, and he starts playing much better hockey. I think that's kind of what he needed. He needed to have a good system around him. Obviously, he played with some solid guys in Buffalo, but it was the Buffalo Sabres, and now he's playing on a team that actually has a legitimate shot here at the Stanley Cup. And that's something where that motivates a player. It doesn't matter who you are, that always motivates a player. But he's playing with better line mates. He's getting better opportunities. They're relying on him to score goals, and he's outmatching a lot of players. He doesn't have to be on that first line. He doesn't have to be the guy playing all the heavy minutes. He could be on your second line and matching against other teams, and they can't match up with a guy like Taylor Hall. So it's really working out in his favor. It's almost like for him to be the best, he can't be the best player on the team. That's when he becomes the player he is, and that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, the thing about Hall too, it's not like he even necessarily looked that bad in Buffalo. His shooting percentage was just so historically low that it was eventually going to regress to the mean if he got traded to another team. And the thing about Boston is the fit was perfect there. Their 5-on-5 scoring was in the bottom third in various metrics across the league. And really, Hall complementing David Krejci on that second line is exactly the type of fit there. It was just a perfect situation for him. And this game, but getting back to this game, it was just crazy in terms of the events that took place, from David Pasternak missing a wide open net to Kyle Clutterbuck using Craig Smith's stick to get off the ice, Matthew Barzal cross-checking Curtis Lazar in the neck area, and then David Krejci spears Barzal in the scrum later after a few cross-checks were given. These two teams really seem to hate each other, Steven. And do you think these pesky Islanders can play their systems to beat the Bruins, or was this just a one-off for Boston?
That's the thing with this Islanders team. I posed the question on my THN Now show, and I said, this Islanders team, we know their goaltending can be really good. We know their defense can be really good, but can their offense keep up? And the offense did keep up in Game 4, obviously tying the series, winning 4-1. I do like the Boston Bruins as a team better, because even though the Islanders might at times get the better goaltending or the better defense, it's not a big enough difference compared to the offense the Boston Bruins can do. But basically, we know Boston, they brought in some key pieces this year where they needed some guys who could score outside of that top line. The top line, when you shut them down, it's harder for them to figure things out, but they do have a better second line now. So the fact that it's 2-2, it's been kind of just every other game we're seeing a different team kind of take control. I still do like the Boston Bruins a bit better here, but the Islanders just played a very good game. They got in Boston's head, and they had that home crowd advantage there, so that really worked in their favor. So again, I still think Boston's the better team, but the Islanders play a good playoff hockey. They'll grind you to the end, and if they can keep doing that, I think they got a shot here.
And arguably the craziest game of the whole playoffs was played yesterday, and that was Game 4 of the Tampa-Carolina series. There were 8 goals scored in that second period alone, and Tampa overcame a 4-2 deficit to win the game 6-4. Kristen Shilton of TSN actually pointed out how Tampa scored as many power play goals in that second period as the Leafs did in the whole playoff series against the Habs. How are they just able to be so dominant with the man advantage?
Well, you just look at the players they have. You basically, their second power play line is most teams' first line in any situation. The Lightning just have so much talent there, and they could do so much there. When you got Stamkos, you got give him the open room. He's awesome. Braden Point, we just know how dynamic of a player he is. Killorn has always been good on the power play. So this is a team. When I don't even have to mention Hedman or Kucherov. Like, this group is just so strong in those situations. So when you got the depth of talent that they have, it's going to show up, and that's what we saw last night. So really good game. Carolina obviously had a good counterattack there, and it's a shame that the Hurricanes are this is kind of a 3-1 series right now, because the Hurricanes have played really well. It's like, it's none of this them losing. It just doesn't seem like it's their fault. It's just you're playing against a Tampa Bay team that most expect to go kind of all the way, and to watch Carolina just compete with them has been really entertaining. So it's been a really good series, as we all expected, and I do hope it goes 7 games, but we're going to need to see Carolina kind of pick it up here.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. And of course, I'm going to make it about the Leafs again. Braden Point has played the same amount of seasons as Matthews, Marner, and Nylander, and actually started off his career having to earn more ice time. He improved gradually, and that led to his 92-point season just a few years ago. He's now won a Stanley Cup and looks poised to make his 3rd conference final appearance. I know the Leafs are compared to Tampa a lot, but this core does have an age discrepancy. The Leafs, aside from Tavares, they're basically all the same age. But in Tampa, Stamkos was drafted in 2008. Kucherov was a little bit older than Point as well. It's a little bit different. But in your mind, do you envision the Leafs core being able to have the success that the Lightning have currently had?
From an on paper perspective, you got to look and say, yeah, this team should be able to. Part of Tampa Bay is they've been able to kind of just wrangle in so many contracts that's so cheap, and they've been able to really build a winning culture there. And you take a look, their defense, that's a group there. Like, you could take one guy out, put another guy in, and you don't miss a beat. Like, that's just how good that decor is too. And when you got the best goalie in the world, again, it helps. So I don't think the Leafs are necessarily there from an upfront talent perspective. There's definitely, it's not too far off. But again, this is just a Tampa team that's just been built so well. They got the advantage of the tax situation over there, and they got a winning group. They got a group that just they got a great coach, great, like they don't have any weakness to this team. When they lost the Columbus Blue Jackets, I think everyone wrote that off as, okay, that was bad, but that was a fluke. We know that this is a team is way better than that, and they went through. So Toronto has now gone through those kind of same situations the Leafs have, or the Lightning have gone to. I just don't think they have the overall depth to kind of make up. They need another. I think a guy like Blake Coleman would be great for the Leafs, and I know Hyman is a more skilled version of that in a sense, but obviously a little bit of a different position up front. But I do think that you need those hardworking guys, and a guy like Blake Coleman out in the bottom, where he was playing top line in New Jersey for that trade last year. It's hard to really beat this group. They're just that strong.
I mean, Tampa's ability to identify talent, especially lower in their forward lineup, is just insane. Players like Ross Colton, Mitchell Stevens. This is the type of talent you need really to win a Stanley Cup. Because when you can, like, I mean, they lost Carter Verhaeghe for nothing, and it didn't even matter. He goes to Florida, and he's instant. Same with Jonathan Marchessault too, just a few seasons before that. They can just let these guys walk, who are clearly guys who can be 50, 60-point players, and they're perfectly fine because they just have all of these players in their system. And moving on to the last two playoff series currently being played in the second round, we got Colorado and Vegas. They're playing Game 4 tonight with the Avalanche leading that series 2-1. Steven, do you get the sense that Vegas could come back in this series, or is Colorado just too dominant this season?
I picked Vegas to win the Stanley Cup this year, but obviously it's kind of looking like that's not going to happen. The Colorado Avalanche, the series has been much better after that really crazy first game. But Colorado, just like, there's just, again, no real weaknesses. They've had nothing really that they've had to be like they've been playing their whole game the entire playoffs between St. Louis and Vegas. Their goaltending's been good. Their defense has been excellent. They're scoring really well. They didn't need Kadri, apparently. They're scoring a lot without him. So this team just looks so good. And when they get Kadri back, we remember how good of a playoff he had last year. If he can kind of channel that energy again, that's going to be massive for the Colorado Avalanche. So this team is just rolling really well. The President's Trophy's winners for a reason. They look so good there. They're looking so good now. I don't think Vegas is going to catch up.
Their D core is just insane to me. Cale Makar likely is winning the Norris Trophy soon. If it's not this season, definitely the next. Devon Toews, I mentioned this almost every show now. I still can't believe he was traded for only two second-round picks. I know the Islanders were in a tough situation there, but there are people that legitimately believe he could be on Team Canada's blue line. I don't know if you necessarily agree with that. Sam Girard's taken huge steps this season as well, and they still got Bowen Byram, who's going to continue to improve there. And Connor Timmins, who didn't play at all last season, has been able to step back in. It's just they're same with Tampa. They're able to identify talent. It doesn't matter which draft round it is, and they're able to pluck these players into the lineup, and they can succeed. And ultimately, I mean, look how good they look this season. And the last series really that we got to talk about here, not the most exciting one, if I have to say. Montreal, Winnipeg. They're playing Game 3 tonight. Paul Stastny has traveled with the team and could be playing for the Jets as well in this game, according to Elliot Friedman. Are the Habs going to be able to keep this up, Steven? Limiting these offensive teams playing with their system and continue to get this version of Carey Price where he looks almost unstoppable?
Well, I don't expect them to win a game 1-0 again. That was kind of just Carey Price playing Carey Price as we expect. Right now, we have two of the better goalies in the league playing against each other, and one is clearly looking a bit better. Montreal, they kind of just took all that momentum, that high of like, why not us? Like, yeah, sure, we weren't the greatest team in the regular season, but that doesn't matter. We made the playoffs. Let's see what we can do. And so far, the Canadians just have everyone's buying into it. They don't have a guy who's necessarily outplaying another in the forward. They're getting really good team chemistry here. They're getting guys who are scoring from all their lines. They're looking really good. Now they kind of really rallied around the Jake Evans injury. The Jets now they're in a situation where they didn't have too much adversity against the Oilers. Obviously, they did have to come back behind that one game, but otherwise, that was a series where the Jets definitely looked way better, and they ended up winning that series. For the Montreal Canadiens, they really had to fight to get here. They really had to push the envelope, and so far right now, the Canadiens look like the hungrier team. So the Jets are going to need a bit of puck luck here, but again, Carey Price is playing some of the best hockey we've ever seen him play. That first round series was, I'd say, the best series we've ever seen him, and now he's looking just as good against the Winnipeg Jets. So yeah, not the most exciting playoff series, but it's interesting to kind of see how the Canadians kind of just keep punching up against their weight class. And we know the Jets, they struggled at the end of that regular season. Montreal was not too far from passing them, but in the end, the Canadians just look really hungry right now.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. And do you think that's going to be enough for them to book a conference final appearance, potentially playing against this dominant Colorado team?
Well, you don't want to be playing against Colorado Avalanche. So no, I do think if they were to move on, Colorado would probably make that pretty easy. But at the same time, we thought that for the Leafs, right? And you look at the Leafs, say they got a lot of talent. Colorado's got a lot of talent, and I'd say Montreal's got the goalie advantage there. And Montreal's defense is playing pretty well in this playoff. So I I I still expect Colorado to win that series, but again, I think we've been proven wrong already in this playoffs that don't count out the Montreal Canadiens.
I'll even say this too, like Montreal last season played a 50-win Philadelphia Flyers team and looked really good through those 6 games there. I do think people are probably going to expect it to be Colorado in 4 or 5, but I wouldn't be surprised if Montreal took that series to 6 games and made it somewhat interesting. Although I would be very shocked if Colorado could somehow lose that series, because that just seems impossible at the moment. Now we got to talk a little bit about the OHL draft, Steven, and obviously history was made. Taya Curry was the first ever female selected in the OHL priority selection draft. She is a goaltender, is drafted by the Sarnia Sting at 267th overall. What a great accomplishment this is for the sport. And she talked to Ron McLean last night on Sportsnet, saying that 2-time gold medalist Shannon Shabazados texted her, and that was a big highlight. Steven, do you envision that she'll eventually become the first female player to play in an OHL game at some point?
Well, the story heading into the draft was that she is looking at the NCAA route, and that probably is the best choice, because if she was to only play, let's say, one OHL game, she would not be able to go the NCAA route, which in women's hockey, that is kind of the way to go. So if I'm being fully honest, I don't. She's a very talented goalie, definitely deserved to be drafted, very undersized, and it was kind of interesting. Her goalie partner, Owen Davey, didn't get drafted, even though he had the better stats. But I think that they're going to work with her to make sure she's the best goalie possible. It does sound like she's going to go to the PWHL, the women's AA league next year, which is a very strong league. So I think she's going to be a huge fixture of Team Canada going forward at the World Championships and Olympics. And the fact that she was this was one where she was definitely in the conversation to be drafted the whole time, and not just because she was a female, but because she deserved to be in the conversation. And that's really cool, because we haven't seen that before. So she's definitely got a shot at it. I do think the best route for her, and it seems like the route she will go, though, is the NCAA route.
Well, that's interesting to hear coming from you. And I also noticed you reported on the fact that Owen Sound originally picked, I believe his name is Zane Parik,
yeah.
And he wasn't actually eligible to be drafted until next year. This was kind of similar to when the Sabres were trying to pick Aaron Reinrich in 1984 and found out he wasn't old enough. They ended up drafting Leyland Hills instead, Owen Sound. Run down exactly what happened there, and how didn't they know he wasn't eligible?
So the thing about this whole draft is the OHL, they put this central scouting list out together of players that are eligible, and he was listed on there because he's been playing against 2005 talent. And we have seen this before, where teams have had, or the OHL scouting service have put 2005 born players born a year later on the draft, because some of the best players will play a year up. And Zane Parik is actually a top 3 prospect for 2022. And it was funny because I happen to be writing I always do an early preview on the next year's draft right after the current draft. And I had just finished my write-up on him, and I'm like, did I somehow screw up his birthday? And all of a sudden he goes from being a 3rd overall prospect to 247th or wherever they picked. Well, no, so he wasn't actually eligible at all. So it was just a mistake by the OHL. But the problem is these teams didn't really get to do a lot of their homework. I did talk to a lot of the OHL teams who were asking me who I would pick at certain picks, and it's just because they truly didn't know this year. Most of these players didn't play. There was a lot of video footage of tournaments going on, but they were 4-on-4 tournaments with no physical contact, and half the time the defense did not exist there. So it was really hard to get any good footage this year of these players. So they're really going off of last year, and you got guys who, I talked to one prospect who grew 7 inches this year. Well, all of a sudden your style of play changes so much when you grow that much, and stuff like that isn't always really relayed to the team. So it's there's only so much you could do in the draft. And to be fully fair, a lot of the times when you get to the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th round, you're really just kind of guessing at that point, and most of those guys will never even have a shot at making the team or in the league, but you're trying to find some gem, and in that case they just happened to pick a guy who wasn't available. So it's pretty funny.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people probably would wonder how an OHL team could even make that mistake. But this isn't the NHL draft, guys. Like, these guys aren't getting the same amount of coverage as obviously NHL draft eligible prospects are. This is the OHL priority selection.
And add in the fact that like none of these players played this year.
Yeah, none of them played.
Like you look at I did find somewhere online that actually had Zane as a 2005 born player, but that was just a mistake. And that maybe the OHL Central Scouting saw that and just said, because like hard to be a central scouting service when you can't go see the players in person. Only some areas did play some games this year, and that's not a lot to go off of.
Definitely. And we have to make the OHL draft again about the Leafs, Steven. Coming from Kyle Pushman on Twitter, Jack Pridham, son of Leafs assistant general manager and capologist Brandon Pridham, was drafted earlier. Drafted yesterday by the Kitchener Rangers, and he was selected 177th overall. Also, Darcy Tucker's son, I saw, was drafted as well. And this leads into the final question here. Which team impressed you the most in the OHL draft this year with their selections?
Well, it's really tough to kind of say.
You could even guess.
Like I'd say Sudbury. I think they got they obviously got Quentin Musty at number 1, which no one really expected even 2 weeks ago that was going to happen. It looked like he was going to the U.S. national development team, so that was a big deal. They got Noah Cochran, who was my third top prospect in this draft, at 160. So assuming he isn't going the NCAA route, a lot of people were very confused on that one. So I thought that one was interesting. I thought North Bay and Kingston got some good picks out there. They got this year's draft very strong in the Oakville contingent, and being from Oakville and watching this age group from a long time, it was cool to see so many of these guys drafted. It was almost the entire team, I believe, which is hard to do, but they kind of made some really good picks there. And I thought Ottawa actually really came out really well with Christopher Barless at number 12. My understanding was that he kind of just really wanted to stay in Ottawa, and that's why he kind of landed there. And then they were able to go out there and pick Luca Pinelli in the second round, who his brother Francesco Pinelli is a prospect for the 2021 NHL draft, and that was a good one. And then I thought Cooper Foster was a pretty good underrated guy to get also later in the second round. So I think those teams kind of were the ones that really shone through, and it's really hard to tell because a lot of these guys I haven't seen play in a year and a half, 2 years, and that's kind of what the teams are at too. They're just really relying on what they hope will work out. So it's going to be a few years till we know really how strong this group was.
Definitely. And it's going to be exciting to finally watch these OHL teams play again next season. Do you think everything will just be smooth swing? They'll be able just to run the season normally after having to go the full season not playing? Like, do you think these OHL teams are financially able to just play, have their teams play a whole season again?
You hope so. You gotta hope so. I don't even think the league knows or the team knows. It's unlike the NHL teams, missing the whole year is really tough. And also added thing is when you've got these star players, you like last year, one of the things that was lost, Sudbury lost a year of Quinton Byfield. Yeah. The rest of the teams that Sudbury plays missed a year of Quinton Byfield coming and visiting their cities and saying, hey, this guy's pretty darn good. Look at him. And because he wouldn't have made the NHL and he couldn't have played in the AHL in the regular year. So you look at a guy like that, and that would have been huge for those teams. You lose that on top of obviously the full season, and now a lot of those guys that would have come back for a final year are gone. Quinton Byfield should not be coming back. So when you're looking at that, it's going to be tough. But I think people are going to be dying to go back to see hockey again, and it'll be way easier to get a ticket at a Mississauga Steelheads game or a London Knights or a Kitchener Rangers game than it's going to be driving out to a Leafs game. So we just I hope that it works out, but there's definitely a lot of stuff to go behind the scenes still to go.
Definitely. And with that, we can move on to some more World Championships actions. Obviously, the biggest storyline coming from the Worlds was Canada's 0-3 start to the tournament and then magically coming all the way back. They're now facing Finland in the gold medal game that's about to get underway here in just about, I believe, an hour and a half. By the time this show is up, people will probably know who won. But what are your thoughts really on this Canada's team this year?
This is a Canada team that, like, even though they lost the first 3 games, I think the only game they actually played poorly was against the Americans. I thought they definitely outplayed Latvia, they outplayed Germany, but they got really good goaltending and they played shutdown defense, so it worked out. I thought Canada, they needed a guy to come be the finisher, and they finally got that in the 4th game against Norway when Andrew Mangiapane, who was my pick for the tournament MVP, and from the sounds of it probably will end up winning that, which was huge because he did miss the first 3 games. He came back. Connor Brown didn't have a single point in that run. The offense had completely dried up. I think it was only like 2 goals in the first 3 games. It was just a brutal run, and all of a sudden they couldn't stop scoring after that, and they started to look really good. And Connor Brown was good, and he's the top scorer of the tournament at this point, and probably will finish that way, assuming he gets another point. But I think Canada they needed everything kind of to work together. Owen Power started to play outstanding hockey near the end of the round robin, and he's been one of the best players outside of Troy Stetcher on the blue line. Darcy Kemper really was hurting the team early on, and that's no longer the case. He's now really kind of figured out what he's got to do there. And in the end, Canada, I think, is just playing more complete games. They're scoring early. They're forcing the teams to chase, and they're doing a good job of preventing those high danger chances. So, not the sexiest Team Canada we've ever seen, but definitely one that's got a lot of heart, and they really want to be there. And let's not forget, a lot of these European teams, like the Latvian team, most of those guys play together all season long, and Canada literally had 3 practices before they actually hit the ice, and they didn't. Most of those players had never met each other before, so you got those challenges, and it's tough for those guys to really adapt. And from talking to players, it's like once we hit after like the 3rd game, it's like we really came close, and we banded together, and they got points every single game after that, and that's been kind of the key to Canada getting to the final.
I just want to dive a little bit more into Owen Power here and how he looked basically as the games progressed. He was given a more prominent role on the team. What did you really think of him? I saw he played over 27 minutes that one game. He ended up getting more power play time. What did you really think of Power here?
Power at the beginning of the tournament, he made a lot of mistakes as he was trying to adjust to playing against men for the first time. And instead of benching him or scratching him or whatever, the coaching staff, Gerard Gallant, said, no, we're going to ride you out. We're going to help you develop, help you learn, help you get better. And once he got the confidence, oh man, he was unstoppable, playing heavy minutes, playing shutdown minutes at the end of games. They were throwing him against anything. And for a guy that big, he's been proven that he could skate so well. And there's a reason why he is a projected number 1 pick for the draft. It's not like this guy's just big and that's all he is. No, he can move very well. He shoots really well. He finds his teammates very well. So I think he's had a really good tournament. The only guy that I think has been better on the blue line has been Troy Stetcher. And Stetcher had previously played in this tournament. He know this big ice, but you got to throw Owen Power into playing on the bigger ice in a big tournament like this for the first real time. And then also playing against men, older competition, pro players. I think he's handled it really well.
Well, when you came on my Sabres podcast 3 months ago, you did say that Owen Powers will likely be the first overall pick in this draft. I've seen a lot of people on Twitter saying that this tournament has really solidified in their opinions that he should be the first overall pick, that he's kind of separated themselves from the conversation from a guy like Matt Beniers. Well, who do you think the Sabres are selecting first overall there?
I got to go with Owen Power for sure. I do think I know a lot of people say that he and Rasmus Dahlin play the same D spot, but Owen Power has actually played both sides, so it doesn't really matter that too much. Power is going to be someone where he's going to quarterback your power play. He's going to be the rock in front of your net. You're going to love him either when he jumps in on the offensive side of things. I don't think he's necessarily going to be a big time offensive player. I do think, like, if we're looking long term, I think Rasmus Dahlin is still in a positive situation. Rasmus Dahlin will be the better offensive defenseman, but I think we get Owen Power's reliability. He's so hard to play against. It's when you got a 6'6" guy that's over 200 pounds that can play physical but doesn't need to because he's got everything else going for him. That's a good sign there. So I do think that the Sabres will go out there and pick Owen Power.
Well, that'd be definitely interesting to see. And just to wrap up the world's talk here, what other countries surprised you with their play? Kazakhstan had their best ever finish, coming in at 10th place. Latvia and Germany even handed Canada a couple losses there. What is your opinion, having covered this whole tournament?
Well, Kazakhstan was definitely a really positive one there. Nikita Boyorkin, a guy that the coaching staff really knew nothing about on Kazakhstan, and they made him the starting goalie anyways, and he just looked outstanding. Like he definitely deserved some attention, where if we were to pick 3 of the top 3 goalies of this tournament, he would get some votes. He was that good of a player. So really good run for him. In Kazakhstan, they weren't a high scoring team, but they just kind of figured ways to kind of really grind these things out. Germany's defense has been one of the most fun things I've seen in this tournament's history, where they just block every shot humanly possible. Like, if they didn't block the shots at the rate they do, the shots would be like 60 to like 20 each game, but they're out there like limiting to 30 shots because everyone's kind of going for those let's block every shot at all cost situations. So that was really cool. Latvia, we expected they were going to play really well at home, and they didn't have their best team, and they still did really well. It was odd that they didn't go with their starting goalie for the final game, Matis Kivalenkas, the Blue Jackets prospect. They didn't have him in that final game, and he wasn't listed as having an injury from before the game, so I don't understand totally what that was about. Sweden, absolute disappointment. This team could not put together a consistent 60-minute performance, and they missed out on the quarterfinals for, I believe, the first time ever. So that was kind of a tough situation there. But a lot of really fun games at the beginning where a team like Kazakhstan being Latvia is actually a pretty big deal, because Latvia had always been the better team against Kazakhstan. So Kazakhstan almost making the quarterfinals in a year where it's so rare for them to stay up in the top group for 2 years in a row. Obviously, there was no relegation this year, but in a normal year, that team's fighting to stay alive. And not only did they stay alive, but they literally made the final day so important for teams like Canada and Latvia and Germany, and I think that's pretty cool. So for me, that was one of the biggest surprises of the tournament. Also, Great Britain beating Belarus. Belarus didn't finish well. They actually came last in the group because Great Britain beat them. But for GB to do that was a pretty big deal. Their first regulation win in 59 years. That's impressive.
That definitely is there. And really end off the final segment of this show, Steven, we're going to be doing 3 NHL predictions. I'm going to hand you a few true or falses, and you're going to have to give me your take. So true or false, one of Colorado or Tampa is winning the Stanley Cup this season?
I'm going with true, and I think I'm going to go with Colorado winning that one.
I guess Montreal isn't then, eh? For the second one, this is a little bit more interesting. True or false, one of Mitch Marner, Dougie Hamilton, or Seth Jones are being traded this offseason?
True. And I'm thinking it's only one of them. And I think it's going to be Seth Jones. That seems like that's a very, very good chance that happening.
That seems to be the one there as well. And then true or false, I'm pretty sure I already know your answer. I'll even ask for your likelihood of this. Someone other than Owen Power or Matt Beniers is selected by Buffalo with that first overall pick.
I'd say there's a good chance, to be fully honest. It's really wide open, but in my personal opinion, no, I don't think anyone's picked. But it's a guy like William Eklund, Matty Beniers, and Simon Edvinsson could really push that.
Definitely. And with that, I think that wraps up our show. Thank you for listening to the Babbling Buds podcast. These first few episodes have been great, and Steven was a great guest in this one. Remember to follow him on his Twitter at Steven Ellis THN, as he posts some great handmade drawings during international tournaments. That's kind of his gimmick now. And he gives quality hockey analysis on multiple leagues, really. And once again, thanks for listening or watching, as we have babbled enough for today. Until next time.